In the bitter chill of a Montana winter, James Holloway had buried his heart alongside his family beneath the snow-covered pines. He sought no company, no comfort, until one night, fate stumbled to his doorstep in the form of a wounded bear cub. With predators circling and darkness closing in, could this tiny creature awaken a courage James thought he'd lost forever, or would protecting it cost him everything he had left? In the high reaches of Montana, winter came early and lingered long. By December, the Bitterroot Forest was cloaked in perpetual white, the snow piling thick enough to silence even the stubborn rush of the creeks. The nearby town of Pine Creek, with its scattered cabins and single main street, shrank inward as temperatures fell, lights dimmed early, and people retreated indoors, sheltering against a bitter wind that whispered loneliness through the pines. Perched on the edge of this vast wilderness stood a modest ranger station, built from logs and solitude. It was home now only to James Holloway, who had become as much a part of the landscape as the snow-laden fir trees and distant mountains. James was a tall, sturdy man nearing 50, broad-shouldered from years of physical labor. His rugged face carried deep-set blue eyes under brows perpetually drawn together, framed by thick hair streaked with early gray. His beard, neatly trimmed yet untamed, added an extra layer of distance from anyone who dared approach. He'd not always been alone. Once, laughter had filled the cabin, echoing between walls lined with photos and souvenirs from happier days. But 4 winters ago, tragedy had shattered everything. A terrible accident on an icy road had taken both his wife, Anna, and their young son, Matthew, leaving behind an emptiness James never sought to fill. Since then, silence had settled permanently over him, as heavy and oppressive as the layers of snow outside. Most days, James busied himself with work, patrolling trails, repairing fences, or maintaining the station's radio communication. On quiet evenings, he meticulously sharpened tools or lost himself in faded photographs. The people in Pine Creek called him the Silent Ranger, a man who barely spoke, even during his infrequent trips to town for supplies. Their whispers didn't trouble James. He'd long accepted solitude as his chosen companion. Tonight, the wind shrieked through the trees with an unusual bitterness. A blizzard had risen suddenly, catching the forest unaware, battering the cabin walls, and shaking windows glazed with frost. Inside, James stoked the fire, its flames throwing dancing shadows across the rugged furniture and the thick, woven rug Anna had made years before. He stared into the glowing coals, lost in thought, when a faint, plaintive sound pierced through the storm. A small, almost desperate cry barely audible over the wind's fury. James rose instinctively, pulling on a heavy wool coat and sturdy boots. His movements were slow yet deliberate, a man accustomed to hardship and harsh conditions. As he opened the door, snow rushed inside, swirling around his feet, the chill cutting sharp against his skin. He stepped out onto the porch, squinting through blowing snow and darkness. The landscape appeared ghostly beneath the pale glow of his lantern. At first, he saw nothing. Then the sound came again, weaker, more urgent, a thin whimpering from the edge of the porch. James moved carefully, lantern held low, until he caught sight of a small, trembling shape huddled near a woodpile. As he approached, the light illuminated a tiny bear cub, no older than a few months, its thick brown fur matted with snow and streaked crimson from a fresh wound along its side. The cub's eyes, dark as polished stones, reflected fear and pain. It tried to back away, growling weakly, but it was clearly too exhausted and injured to pose any threat. James hesitated, his hand on the porch rail. His training had always cautioned against interfering with wildlife, particularly bears. But looking at this frail creature, helpless and shivering, something deep within him stirred, a quiet, persistent voice he'd thought had died with his family. It whispered that to leave this cub here, vulnerable and injured, would be another loss, another failure. He swallowed hard, pushed aside hesitation, and reached out gently, murmuring quiet assurances he barely recognized as his own voice. Lifting the cub carefully, James felt its frail body tense and then sag with resignation. He carried the small animal inside, closing the door against the storm. Setting the cub gently by the fire, he moved swiftly to gather medical supplies. A basin of warm water, clean cloths, disinfectant, and his rarely used first aid kit. He knelt beside the frightened cub, working carefully to clean and dress the wound. The bear whimpered but stayed surprisingly calm, its dark eyes watching James with cautious trust. With the bleeding stopped and the wound cleaned, James wrapped the cub loosely in an old woolen blanket, mindful not to cause further pain. Settling back in his worn leather chair, James allowed himself to study his unexpected guest. Despite its condition, the cub's breathing gradually steadied, a small comfort against the raging storm outside. James felt an unfamiliar sensation, responsibility intertwined with a faint glimmer of warmth. He hadn't felt anything like it since Matthew used to nestle into his arms on chilly evenings, asking for stories before bedtime. Shaking his head, James pushed those thoughts away. This was merely an act of kindness, nothing more. Hours passed, and the storm continued to batter the cabin relentlessly. James drifted into restless sleep, waking periodically to check on the cub. By dawn, the snow had finally slowed, leaving an eerie calm over the forest. Rising from his chair, stiff but alert, James glanced out the window and froze. Surrounding the cabin, circling at the edges of the clearing, were dozens of fresh tracks, unmistakably those of wolves. His breath caught sharply as he surveyed the scene. The predators had come silently during the storm, drawn undoubtedly by the scent of blood and weakness. Turning slowly back to the cub, still sleeping peacefully near the warmth of the fire, James understood clearly what he had done. He had stepped into nature's harsh cycle, placing himself squarely between predator and prey. But strangely, he felt no regret. Instead, an old resolve began stirring within him, determination long dormant since the loss of his family. The wolves would return. He was sure of it. But for the first time in years, James Holloway felt a powerful sense of purpose. This tiny, wounded bear cub, innocent and fragile, had given him something he never thought he'd have again, a reason to stand firm against the bitter winds of his own sorrow. He straightened, drawing himself up to his full height, feeling strength seep back into muscles and spirit alike. The silent ranger was silent no more. Not now. Not while something small and defenseless depended on him. James knew the forest would soon test him, and the approaching danger was undeniable. But beneath his apprehension lay a quiet, steadfast determination. He glanced once more at the sleeping cub, peaceful despite the dangers outside, and whispered softly, "Rest now, little one. You're not alone anymore." Outside, sunlight began breaking through clouds, casting pale gold across snow-covered pines and wolf tracks circling ominously. Montana had seen many harsh winters, but this one promised to be different. This winter, James Holloway would not face it alone. The sunrise over Bitterroot Forest emerged reluctantly, smearing weak gold across a sky still weary from the storm's wrath. James Holloway stood at the cabin's porch, his breath misting in the brittle air as he surveyed the freshly fallen snow. His gaze tightened, tracing a maze of paw prints encircling his cabin. Wolves had silently closed in during the night, leaving their grim calling cards behind, an ominous warning etched clearly around his home. Unease stirred deep in his chest, though fear had long since lost its hold over him. He knew the forest, he knew survival. Yet something about this felt different, more personal. From inside, he heard a soft rustle, followed by a curious grunt. James turned to see the bear cub, now dubbed Rusty for his vibrant reddish-brown fur, pushing awkwardly at the door with his small, padded paws. Despite being barely strong enough to stand steadily, Rusty displayed a stubborn determination, a trait James recognized and quietly respected. Kneeling, James allowed Rusty to wobble into the open air, the cub's black eyes blinking rapidly against the daylight. Rusty sniffed cautiously at the unfamiliar prints, his small nose twitching nervously. You feel it too, don't you? James murmured quietly, more to himself than to the cub. Rusty looked up, his head tilted as though considering James's words seriously. A reluctant smile flickered across James's stern face, brief yet genuine. It had been years since anything had coaxed that expression from him. After assessing the immediate area, James gathered Rusty into his arms and carried him back inside, closing the door firmly against the lingering chill. Rusty squirmed slightly but nestled comfortably against James's broad chest. Once inside, the cub began exploring the cabin, padding curiously across the wooden floors, nosing at furniture and pausing often to look back, as if ensuring James was nearby. Watching Rusty explore, James noticed the cub seemed stronger already, and his wound was healing remarkably well. Still, caution remained necessary. Wolves were patient hunters, and James knew they'd return. He decided to fortify the cabin, strengthening doors and windows, determined to protect this unexpected companion that had already begun to fill the echoing emptiness of his home. As he rummaged through a dusty storage chest for spare nails and wood, James's hand brushed against an old leather-bound journal, tucked away beneath forgotten tools. Curious, he lifted it carefully, the aged leather soft and cracked beneath his fingertips. It had belonged to Hank Morrison, the ranger who occupied this cabin decades before him. James had heard stories of Morrison, an eccentric loner who'd vanished mysteriously into these woods years earlier, becoming a local legend in Pine Creek. Settling by the fireplace, James flipped through brittle pages, each filled with neat yet fading handwriting. Morrison's notes detailed the ordinary rhythms of forest life, weather observations, animal sightings, and descriptions of daily tasks. But deeper into the journal, James discovered passages increasingly concerned with something stranger, an almost mystical connection Morrison felt toward the wildlife. The forest speaks. Morrison had written one entry. We are not separate. They sense us, respond to our intentions. Intrigued yet skeptical, James read further, pausing occasionally to glance at Rusty, now curled into a tight, comfortable ball near the hearth. Another entry stood out, the handwriting urgent. The wolves return each winter. They watch, test boundaries. Protect the small ones. They bring renewal, wisdom. Protect them as you would family. The words resonated deeply within James, unsettling him slightly, yet also strangely comforting. His reading was interrupted by a soft knock at the cabin door. Surprised, James set down the journal and cautiously opened the door, revealing Sarah Blake standing in the pale morning sunlight. Sarah was the local veterinarian from Pine Creek, a slender woman in her late 30s, tall and graceful, with sandy blonde hair tied back neatly beneath a woolen cap. Her green eyes, bright and observant, regarded James warmly, but with professional detachment. "Good morning, James," Sarah greeted gently, her voice clear yet quietly authoritative. She wore a heavy, practical coat, the pockets bulging slightly with veterinary supplies, revealing a readiness for the unexpected. "Sarah," James responded simply, stepping back slightly to invite her in. Their interactions had always been courteous but reserved. James preferred solitude, and Sarah respected that boundary, though he knew the townspeople often wondered aloud about his reclusive ways. Sarah's eyes immediately found Rusty sleeping near the hearth. She smiled, a gentle warmth softening her usually composed expression. "I heard rumors in town about wolves being close. Thought I'd check in, especially now," she nodded toward Rusty, "given your new friend." James gave a small nod, appreciating Sarah's straightforward nature. "Wolves circled the cabin last night," he confirmed. "Rusty here was injured, couldn't leave him out there alone." Sarah knelt quietly beside Rusty, carefully inspecting the cub's stitched wound, gently running practiced fingers along his small frame. Rusty stirred slightly, but didn't resist, sensing the woman's calm expertise. "You've done a good job, James," Sarah praised softly, genuine approval in her voice. As she examined Rusty, James noted the brief shadow that crossed her eyes, a flicker of old pain quickly hidden. James had heard whispers in Pine Creek about Sarah's past, that she'd lost a beloved dog years ago to a wolf attack, an event that had profoundly shaped her determined yet compassionate approach to animal care. Finished with her inspection, Sarah stood, facing James squarely. "Be careful, James. These wolves aren't ordinary. They've grown bold this winter. Scarface, their alpha, has claimed this territory aggressively." "I'll manage," James replied quietly, though he appreciated her concern. Sarah nodded slowly, respecting his quiet strength but clearly worried. "If you need help, any help," Sarah said, her tone serious yet gentle, "call me. Animals depend on us, and I know what it means to lose one. Don't carry everything alone." James hesitated slightly, feeling an unfamiliar urge to trust, to speak freely. "Thank you," he finally answered softly, a small but meaningful acceptance. Sarah seemed satisfied, pulling her coat tighter against the cold as she moved toward the door. After Sarah left, James returned thoughtfully to the journal. The old ranger's words echoed in his mind, weaving through Sarah's warnings about Scarface and his ruthless pack. He knew the journal might contain clues to defending Rusty and the cabin, insights into dealing with the wolves. He resolved to study Morrison's notes closely, determined to find wisdom hidden among the faded pages. Evening shadows lengthened quickly across the cabin floor, drawing James's attention away from his reading. Rusty had awakened and now sat expectantly near him, large eyes fixed hopefully on James's face. The cub tilted his head in a gesture that unmistakably asked for dinner, eliciting a reluctant chuckle from James. He rose to prepare food, feeling strangely comforted by Rusty's steady, innocent presence. Later that night, with Rusty sleeping safely nearby, James sat quietly by the fire, reflecting on the day's discoveries. Wolves circled closer, and he sensed clearly the coming danger. But alongside that peril was something else, a fragile bond beginning to form, not only with Rusty, but perhaps also with Sarah, who'd broken gently through his solitude. James felt oddly comforted by these small connections, reminders that even amidst solitude, no one truly stood alone. Outside, the wind whispered warnings through pine branches, carrying distant howls from Scarface and his pack, haunting yet strangely familiar. James tightened his jaw resolutely. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Fate had drawn unmistakable tracks around his cabin, pulling him inexorably toward a destiny intertwined with courage, companionship, and a newfound willingness to trust. The days grew shorter as December deepened its grip upon Bitterroot Forest. Snow fell almost daily, transforming James's isolated cabin into a solitary fortress amidst a white, relentless landscape. Shadows of the great pines grew long, whispering secrets beneath their heavy boughs, secrets that seemed more ominous with each passing day. James Holloway stood outside, breath clouding softly in the frigid air, his rugged face lined with resolve. In his gloved hands, he held a bundle of newly cut timber and steel wire, materials that would soon form a protective fence around his small refuge. Ever since Sarah Blake had warned him about Scarface, the alpha wolf notorious in the region, James felt the wolf's presence growing closer, bolder. Tracks appeared almost nightly, encircling the cabin, a silent declaration of hostility. Rusty remained close, pacing restlessly at James's heels. The bear cub, though gradually healing, was still too weak to venture safely into the wilderness. Yet, despite his fragile condition, Rusty had begun to reveal a personality of bold curiosity and affection, frequently pressing against James's legs as if reassuring himself that his protector remained near. James couldn't deny the quiet fondness he felt toward this small creature who, in his vulnerability, had somehow awakened something deeply protective within him. The distant howl of wolves echoed faintly, carried by the cold wind through the valley, snapping James from his brief contemplation. Grimly, he continued erecting the fence. Each wooden post hammered into the frozen earth felt like a defiance. Each strand of wire pulled tight was a whispered vow. Rusty watched silently, his dark eyes wide with a mix of wonder and uncertainty, occasionally pawing at stray sticks or clumps of snow in an attempt at playful distraction. After hours of labor, James stepped back, examining his work critically. The fence, although simple, was sturdy enough to provide a significant barrier. It wasn't perfect, but it offered a sense of security that James hadn't known he craved until now. He allowed Rusty to nuzzle his hand briefly, the cub's damp nose cold against his calloused fingers, before they returned indoors, the warmth of the cabin welcoming them like an old friend. Inside, James's attention soon returned to the journal of the enigmatic ranger, Hank Morrison. He had grown increasingly captivated by Morrison's stories, especially now, as danger loomed nearer. Settling into his chair by the fire, James turned the pages carefully, revealing another handwritten entry, its ink fading gently with age. December 1963. They came again last night. Wolves. Bold, cunning, led by one beast larger and fiercer than the others, marked by a scar across its cruel muzzle. I named him Scarface. They sought the fawn I'd rescued last week, weak and defenseless. I drove them off this time, but I know they'll return. They sense vulnerability, drawn by it as surely as moths to flame. The forest demands courage. She does not easily forgive weakness. James paused, his pulse quickening. Morrison had faced this very same threat decades ago. Scarface was no ordinary predator, but a lineage of cunning that terrorized this region across generations. A strange comfort and courage rose within him, knowing he was not alone in facing such ruthless foes. James's concentration broke as headlights flickered through the cabin windows, briefly illuminating the room. Surprised, he rose swiftly, wary of unexpected visitors. Peering cautiously outside, he recognized a battered old truck approaching. It belonged to Tom Jenkins, a retired woodsman from Pine Creek who sometimes visited to bring news or trade supplies. Tom was a lean, wiry man nearing 70, with skin weathered by decades of mountain life and eyes that still sparkled with youthful mischief despite his advanced years. His white hair was sparse beneath a knitted cap, and he walked with a slight limp from an old logging accident, though he never allowed it to slow him down. James stepped onto the porch as Tom parked and climbed carefully from the truck, waving cheerfully. "Cold enough for you, James?" Tom joked, voice raspy but friendly, his eyes crinkling warmly at the edges. Tom's easy manner had always eased the tension James felt around most townspeople. "Cold enough," James replied quietly, nodding. Rusty peeked timidly around James's legs, curious but cautious about the stranger. Tom noticed the cub immediately, his eyes widening with genuine delight. "Well, who's your new friend?" Tom chuckled, extending a gentle hand toward Rusty. The cub sniffed cautiously, then allowed Tom a brief, cautious pet. "Found him injured," James explained simply, his voice low yet proud. "Healing up now." Tom straightened slowly, seriousness replacing his smile. "You're careful about those wolves, right? Folks in Pine Creek have been talking. Scarface's pack attacked a farm nearby. Lost 2 sheep already. Mean beasts." James's jaw tightened. "I'm taking precautions." Tom nodded approvingly. "Good. You know, old Morrison had trouble with them wolves too, years back. Claimed Scarface was clever as a fox. Morrison always believed animals had souls, that wolves carried grudges just like men. Odd fellow, but he might have been right." James's gaze sharpened. "You knew Morrison?" Tom's eyes grew distant, a faint sadness lingering in their depths. "We were friends, in a fashion. He saved my dog once, nearly lost a leg to wolves doing it. Morrison had heart, though it cost him plenty. Those wolves never forgot, and neither did he." Tom fell silent for a moment, then offered a reassuring smile. "You need anything, James, you call on me. Don't have to do everything alone." James nodded gratefully, appreciating Tom's steady, genuine presence. He rarely accepted help, yet he felt a bond of trust with this seasoned mountain man. After Tom departed, leaving a small crate of supplies on the porch as a gesture of goodwill, James returned thoughtfully indoors. Rusty, now familiar with their nightly routine, curled up close to the hearth, eyes slowly blinking into sleep. James watched him quietly, struck by Tom's story and Morrison's courage. His heart stirred with newfound determination, realizing the fight ahead was more than survival. It was about protecting innocence, something he had failed to do once before. He would not fail again. That night, as bitter wind clawed hungrily at the cabin, Scarface's chilling howl echoed closer, stronger. James stood by the window, eyes fixed firmly on the darkness beyond the fence, his pulse steady, his breathing calm. Beside him, Rusty stirred, pressing his warm, furry body reassuringly against James's leg. He rested one hand lightly upon Rusty's back, feeling the steady rhythm of the cub's breathing. In that moment, he knew exactly what Morrison had felt all those years ago. The strength born from connection, the clarity granted by purpose. James Holloway was ready to face the ruthless pack head-on, knowing well that courage was born not from solitude, but from the fierce determination to protect those who could not protect themselves. Outside, beneath a sky alive with stars, the wolves gathered silently, eyes glowing with hunger, Scarface standing like a shadowy sentinel at their head. They watched the small cabin carefully, senses alert, patient, and relentless. The conflict had become inevitable. Yet within the cabin's modest walls, James stood firm, bound now to Rusty by loyalty and an unspoken promise. He was prepared. The wolves might circle, but he was no longer alone. Winter's grip tightened mercilessly on the Bitterroot Valley. Each dawn seemed darker, each gust of wind sharper, slicing through the forest and chilling everything to its core. James Holloway, despite his rugged constitution and familiarity with harsh winters, felt the bitter cold penetrate more deeply this year. Yet, amidst the brutal chill, a quiet warmth had begun spreading through his isolated cabin. Rusty, the young bear cub, had become more than just a guest. He had become James's companion. Rusty had grown sturdier and stronger, though still limping slightly on his healed leg. His fur, now thick and lustrous, radiated health under James's meticulous care. The cub's once hesitant movements had transformed into playful strides filled with youthful curiosity. Rusty followed James diligently, often mimicking his protector's quiet demeanor. On particularly cold evenings, the cub nestled at James's feet, emitting gentle, rhythmic breaths as he slept, a comforting presence that had quietly but unmistakably begun to heal James's hidden wounds. James found himself speaking aloud more often, his voice losing its rough edges, smoothed by the simple act of conversation, even if it was merely directed toward a bear cub. One bitter morning, as James chopped firewood, breath steaming in frosty air, the rumble of a distant engine echoed faintly through the trees. He straightened, listening intently, recognizing the familiar sound of Sarah Blake's faded green Jeep approaching cautiously over the icy road. James felt a surprising warmth rise within him, though he refused to analyze it further, instead busying himself with stacking logs as she parked. Sarah stepped from the vehicle gracefully, bundled in a heavy navy coat and woolen scarf, her sandy blonde hair spilling slightly from beneath her knitted cap. She moved confidently, despite the ice, her slender frame suggesting delicateness, yet radiating strength in every purposeful stride. Sarah's green eyes scanned the surroundings sharply, assessing the isolated cabin and its protective fence carefully before settling warmly on James. "Morning, James," Sarah called cheerfully, her voice gently breaking the frozen silence, her breath misting softly around a friendly smile. "Morning," James returned quietly, his voice steady despite the unexpected rush of warmth he felt at seeing her again. Rusty peeked curiously from behind James's legs, his dark eyes wary but intrigued by Sarah's calm presence. "Hello, Rusty," Sarah spoke softly, crouching down to be level with the cub, her demeanor calm, patient. Rusty sniffed cautiously before padding forward bravely, allowing Sarah to gently stroke his thickening fur. James observed quietly, appreciating how Sarah's composed presence seemed to soothe the cub instantly. Standing, Sarah turned her attention back to James, expression now gently serious. "The wolves have attacked another ranch down by Pine Creek," she informed him gravely, eyes shadowed with worry. "Scarface's pack is bolder this winter than ever before. I wanted to make sure you and Rusty were safe out here." James nodded grimly. "They've been testing the perimeter, but no breach yet." Sarah studied him closely, her eyes insightful, clearly sensing more than he revealed. "James," she began softly, gently placing a hand on his forearm, her touch surprisingly warm even through his thick coat. "You don't have to do this alone. People in town worry about you. I worry about you." James hesitated, unaccustomed to such sincere concern directed toward him, especially after years of isolation. His instinct was to withdraw, to guard himself carefully, but Sarah's earnest, steady gaze disarmed him. "I appreciate that," he admitted finally, voice softer than usual. Encouraged by his quiet acceptance, Sarah continued gently. "I brought extra supplies and some medicine for Rusty. He'll need it if we have another storm. Let me help you, James. Trust doesn't weaken us, it strengthens." Moved by her openness, James gave a slow nod, agreeing silently. Sarah smiled warmly, visibly pleased by his small, yet significant step toward trust. They moved inside, Sarah efficiently unpacking supplies, quickly transforming the austere space with warmth and comfort. James watched silently, noticing how easily she fit into the cabin's modest atmosphere. Her presence brought unexpected peace, subtly shifting the room's energy. As Sarah worked, James found himself uncharacteristically opening up, sharing quiet snippets about Rusty's recovery, even mentioning the journal he'd discovered. Sarah listened intently, genuinely interested, her eyes brightening at the mention of Hank Morrison's name. "My father knew Hank," Sarah shared softly, surprising James. "They hunted together occasionally. Dad always said Hank had a rare understanding of wildlife. Animals trusted him. Hank believed wolves remembered faces and grudges, that they could sense fear but respected courage." James leaned forward slightly, intrigued. "You think Scarface remembers?" Sarah nodded seriously, her gaze somber. "Animals can carry memories just as deeply as people, James. My dog, Cody, I lost him years ago, attacked by wolves. It changed how I view them, taught me to respect their nature deeply. But it also taught me the importance of protecting those who can't protect themselves." Her voice held a subtle vulnerability, eyes briefly shadowed by sadness before brightening with quiet resolve. James saw something of himself reflected in Sarah's experience, the shared pain of loss, the understanding that survival required more than isolation. A gentle kinship began to form, built upon quiet empathy and mutual respect. They sat together for hours by the fire, Rusty curled comfortably at their feet, discussing strategies for confronting Scarface's growing aggression. James surprised himself, enjoying Sarah's intelligent, calm suggestions and quiet strength. Her presence felt natural, easing something within him he hadn't known remained tense. Later, as twilight approached, Sarah reluctantly stood, gathering her belongings. "Stay safe, James," she cautioned softly, eyes sincere. "And call me if you need anything. Anything at all." "I will," he promised quietly, feeling a strange reluctance as she moved toward the door. Rusty, sensing Sarah's departure, whimpered softly, his small voice plaintive. Sarah smiled, gently scratching behind the cub's ears affectionately. "Take care of James, Rusty," she whispered conspiratorially. Rusty gazed solemnly at her, eyes wide, seeming to understand the importance of her request. As Sarah's jeep disappeared down the snowy road, James felt a surprising sense of loss, yet also a quiet anticipation. Sarah Blake had stirred emotions within him he had long considered dormant. Rusty pressed against his legs comfortingly, as if sensing his quiet turmoil. Outside, darkness deepened, the distant howl of wolves echoing ominously, a chilling reminder of danger. Yet within the cabin's walls, a quiet strength had grown. James Holloway was no longer entirely alone. Rusty had softened his heart, and Sarah had gently reopened doors he'd sealed long ago. James sat thoughtfully beside the fire. Rusty nestled comfortably against him. A quiet, fragile peace settled around them. The warmth within this small cabin, born of unexpected friendship, shared courage, and gentle companionship, felt strong enough to withstand even the bitterest winter storms. The storm arrived with a ferocity James had rarely witnessed. Bitterroot Valley vanished under an endless veil of snow, whipped violently by relentless winds. Darkness fell prematurely, heavy clouds devouring the twilight, smothering the valley in absolute shadow. James stood near the cabin window, his rugged face reflecting concern beneath the flickering lantern light. He glanced down at Rusty, who paced anxiously near the hearth, his thick fur bristling slightly, sensing the approaching danger. James had always respected the intuitive instincts of animals, and Rusty's current unease deepened his own apprehension. A sharp knock startled James from his thoughts. Quickly moving to the door, he saw Sarah Blake standing shivering on his porch, snowflakes clinging to her heavy navy coat, her eyes wide with urgency. He hurriedly ushered her inside, noting how her usually confident posture had shifted, revealing tension and worry beneath her controlled exterior. "The wolves," Sarah began breathlessly, brushing snow from her sandy blonde hair, her voice slightly shaken yet resolute. "Scarface's pack. They've moved closer. I saw tracks on my way here. We need to prepare." James nodded grimly, acknowledging the seriousness of her words. Rusty moved closer to Sarah, pressing himself comfortingly against her legs, sensing her distress. She gently stroked the cub's fur, calming herself slightly, eyes regaining determination. As James began securing windows and doors, Sarah quickly unpacked emergency supplies she'd brought: a lantern, first aid kit, and extra ammunition. Outside, the wind howled violently, rattling the cabin walls, each gust sounding disturbingly like distant wolf cries. Suddenly, Rusty stiffened, letting out a low growl unusual for the normally gentle cub. James and Sarah exchanged a swift, worried glance. Seconds later, fierce snarling echoed from outside, followed by furious scratching at the fence. Scarface's pack had arrived. James moved decisively, gripping his hunting rifle with steady, practiced hands. Sarah took a deep breath, grabbing a sturdy wooden baton she carried for emergencies. Their eyes met briefly, an unspoken promise passing between them. They would stand firm together, protecting Rusty at any cost. Rusty, sensing the mounting danger, positioned himself bravely near James's side, teeth bared slightly, displaying unexpected courage for a creature so young. James felt a surge of pride mingled with concern, aware of the cub's vulnerability, yet heartened by his resolve. The first strike shattered the cabin's eerie quiet. Scarface himself lunged furiously against the fence, powerful paws clawing relentlessly at the wood and wire. His massive, muscular body, coated in dense black fur streaked by a distinctive, brutal scar across his face, emanated menace and raw strength. Behind him, the pack's glowing eyes glinted ominously, a collective growl filling the air with chilling aggression. James fired a warning shot, the sharp report of his rifle briefly silencing the wolves. Scarface stepped back, his piercing yellow eyes fixed hatefully upon James, intelligent and ruthless, clearly evaluating his human opponent. "Get ready," James warned softly, steadying his aim. Sarah nodded, gripping her baton tighter, her breath even and controlled despite evident tension. Rusty growled quietly, mirroring James's readiness, standing firmly beside his protector. Without warning, Scarface charged, the fence groaning under his furious assault. With a sharp crack, wood splintered, the fence giving way. Wolves poured through the gap, rushing toward the cabin with frightening speed. James fired carefully, aiming to frighten rather than kill. Sarah swung fiercely, fending off smaller wolves attempting to flank them. Rusty, surprisingly agile despite his injury, lunged bravely at a wolf nearing James's blind spot, knocking it aside with unexpected strength. James felt admiration surge through him, stunned by Rusty's instinctive bravery, even as he continued defending their fragile sanctuary. Amidst the chaos, a smaller wolf slipped past, lunging viciously toward Rusty. Sarah reacted swiftly, swinging her baton hard and deflecting the attacker just in time. Breathing hard, she hesitated briefly, her face pale with sudden memory, a shadow from the past surfacing painfully in her eyes. Years before, Sarah had failed to save Luna, a rare mountain lynx injured by a similar wolf attack. She had watched helplessly as Luna's life faded beneath her care, a guilt that had haunted her deeply, hardening her resolve to protect wildlife ever since. That memory resurfaced now, fueling her determination. She would not fail again. Sarah, James's sharp voice pierced through her turmoil, jolting her back to reality. She regained her composure instantly, meeting his eyes briefly, gratitude clear in her gaze. The wolves regrouped, circling cautiously, Scarface pacing methodically, his eyes calculating. James knew they had one final chance. Scarface would not retreat again easily. He quickly lit several torches they'd prepared, handing one to Sarah, holding another high himself. Firelight danced wildly in the darkness, illuminating determined faces and frightened yet brave eyes. "Now!" James shouted, waving his torch menacingly, flames roaring threateningly. Sarah mimicked his actions fiercely, advancing boldly toward the wolves. Rusty followed closely, growling protectively, surprisingly fearless in the face of overwhelming odds. Scarface paused, wary eyes fixed upon the flames. With a final, frustrated snarl, he backed away slowly, signaling his pack to retreat. Within moments, shadows swallowed the wolves once more, their presence fading into the storm's fury. James lowered his torch slowly, relief washing through him. Sarah stood silently beside him, her breathing heavy yet steady, tension gradually easing from her slender frame. Rusty nudged gently against James's legs, as though confirming their safety. James reached down, gently scratching the cub's ears, deeply proud of his courage. "Thank you, Sarah," James murmured softly, eyes filled with sincere gratitude. "I couldn't have done this without you." She smiled faintly, eyes reflecting quiet strength and resolve. "We protected what mattered," she replied simply, glancing fondly toward Rusty, who watched them both with affectionate trust. The storm continued outside, wind and snow battering relentlessly against the damaged fence. Inside, however, a comforting warmth had settled, born from trust, shared courage, and the knowledge they had faced danger together and survived. Sarah sank slowly into a chair near the fireplace, visibly exhausted yet strangely serene. James sat nearby, Rusty curled comfortably at their feet, breathing quietly. Silence settled comfortably between them, each contemplating what they'd just endured. "You all right?" James asked gently after several quiet moments. Sarah hesitated briefly, vulnerability flickering softly in her eyes. "I almost froze again, like before, with Luna," she confessed quietly, voice barely above a whisper. "I promised myself never to fail another animal like that. Tonight I nearly did." James shook his head slowly, his voice gentle yet firm. "You didn't fail, Sarah. You saved Rusty. You saved me." Sarah smiled softly, gratitude and relief mingling in her eyes. James returned her smile warmly, aware something profound had shifted between them, bonds forged deeply through shared peril and quiet understanding. Rusty stirred gently, pressing warmly against Sarah's leg. She leaned down, stroking his soft fur, whispering quiet reassurances. Watching them, James felt peace bloom gently within him, replacing old wounds and shadows. Outside, winter's storm raged on relentlessly, wolves howling in frustration and defeat, their threats distant now. Within the cabin's shelter, however, a quiet victory settled softly, woven from trust, courage, and the gentle yet powerful bonds forged through trials faced bravely together. As the fierce grip of winter gradually loosened its hold over Bitterroot Valley. The days lengthened and sunlight returned to breathe warmth into the forest's sleeping heart. Snowdrifts melted into trickling streams, carrying winter's sorrows away from the cabin's weary walls. James Holloway stood quietly on the porch, breathing deeply, inhaling the scent of damp earth and newly awakened pine needles. The trees stretched their branches toward a star-flecked sky, as though celebrating their own quiet triumph over winter's harshness. Rusty had grown noticeably larger over the passing weeks, his frame sturdy and robust, moving gracefully despite the lingering stiffness in his previously injured leg. The bear cub's fur had thickened into a lush, dark coat, vibrant and gleaming under the moonlight. His eyes, once cautious and wary, now radiated confidence and an irrepressible spirit. Watching Rusty explore the thawing landscape, James felt deep pride mingle gently with bittersweet awareness. Rusty had healed, and the wilderness would soon reclaim him. Sarah Blake stepped onto the porch, her slender figure illuminated softly by lantern light, hair flowing loosely around her shoulders. Her normally controlled expression had softened, her green eyes warm, reflecting tranquility earned through hardships shared. Their experiences battling Scarface's pack had bonded them profoundly, establishing trust and quiet companionship. "It's time, isn't it?" Sarah asked quietly, her voice gentle but filled with understanding, noticing the way James watched Rusty wander eagerly through the tall grasses. James nodded slowly, his expression calm yet introspective. "He's strong enough now. He deserves freedom." Sarah moved closer, gently touching James's arm, her presence comforting yet unobtrusive. "You've done wonderfully, James. You've given him a second chance, just as he's given you one." James looked into Sarah's eyes, feeling gratitude and warmth settle comfortably within him. He knew Sarah spoke the truth. Rusty had indeed given him something precious, a chance at redemption, a gentle balm for old wounds he had assumed would never heal. Early the next morning, they prepared for Rusty's return to the wild. Sarah helped James load the Jeep with provisions, a small gesture to ease Rusty's transition. James secured Morrison's old journal into his satchel, deciding he would add one final chapter himself, concluding the journey that had begun long ago. Their destination was the remote Silver Creek Valley, a protected region deep within Bitterroot, known for lush vegetation and abundant wildlife, ideal for Rusty to thrive safely away from human encroachment and predator threats. The drive was serene, passing beneath towering pines, whispering softly with spring's gentle breath, filling James with a sense of peaceful acceptance. Upon arrival, Rusty explored cautiously, sniffing excitedly through fresh underbrush and grass, his youthful curiosity evident. James knelt beside the cub, gently running his fingers through Rusty's thick fur, feeling the heartbeat beneath steady and strong. "Take care out here, Rusty," he murmured softly, his voice thick with quiet affection. "You've made me stronger, braver. You've taught me hope again." Rusty nuzzled James affectionately, a soft rumble escaping his chest, understanding the tenderness behind James's quiet farewell. Sarah watched silently, her eyes shimmering slightly with emotion, touched deeply by their bond. After long moments, Rusty stepped confidently away, moving deeper into the valley, pausing briefly to look back, dark eyes acknowledging his protector one final time before disappearing gracefully into the wild's welcoming embrace. James stood silently, feeling gentle sorrow and profound fulfillment intertwine. Sarah stood beside him, her presence reassuring, comforting without intrusion. Her voice, quiet and genuine, broke gently through his reverie. "Rusty will always carry your strength with him, James. You've given him more than shelter. You gave him courage and a family." James nodded quietly, absorbing Sarah's words deeply, finding solace in their simple truth. He turned toward her slowly, aware of his heart quietly opening, vulnerability no longer frightening him. Back at the cabin, James carefully opened Morrison's weathered journal beneath warm lamplight, flipping gently to the last empty pages. With steady hands, he began writing thoughtfully, adding his own story, his journey alongside Rusty, and the lessons he'd learned of companionship, bravery, and healing. Rusty came to me broken, helpless. I never imagined then how much healing he'd bring to my own wounded heart. I sheltered him from Scarface's relentless pack. In return, Rusty helped me face my own fears, my own grief. We both emerged stronger, braver. Rusty taught me that the wilderness isn't something we merely survive. It's something we embrace, learning resilience and compassion. His friendship became my redemption. James paused, reflecting deeply before writing the final lines. May Rusty's courage guide anyone who finds this journal. Let it remind you, no matter how deep the scars, healing is always possible. He gently closed the journal, its story finally complete, a legacy passed forward. Sarah watched quietly from across the room, understanding the significance of this act. Their eyes met, sharing quiet acknowledgement of the transformation they'd both experienced. Evening descended softly over Bitterroot Valley, stars emerging gently through velvet darkness, lighting the skies with a gentle radiance. Sarah and James stepped onto the porch together, breathing in the fresh night air. Their quiet companionship felt natural, effortless, built upon trust, empathy, and shared courage. I was afraid to let anyone close again after losing my family. James confessed quietly, vulnerability gently coloring his voice. Rusty changed that, and so did you, Sarah. Thank you. Sarah reached out, gently clasping James's hand, her eyes gentle, affectionate. You've done the same for me. We've both found strength in each other. Their quiet conversation lapsed gently into comfortable silence, hands entwined, standing together beneath endless forest stars, a symbol of quiet triumph over pain and loss. In the days following Rusty's departure, life continued gently, shaped anew by quiet purpose and mutual affection. James continued maintaining the ranger station, now regularly joined by Sarah, whose presence had become essential, quietly transformative. Pine Creek's residents noticed the subtle yet unmistakable shift in James, warmed by the gentle companionship he and Sarah now shared openly. The locals greeted them warmly, sensing the quiet healing that had taken place, respecting the bond formed through shared courage and trials overcome. James often walked quietly in the evenings, gazing thoughtfully towards Silver Creek Valley, knowing Rusty thrived safely in the wilderness. The cub's courage a gentle presence guiding him forward, reminding him of possibilities, redemption, and renewal. Standing beneath the forest stars one night, James embraced the calm that had settled comfortably into his heart, quietly grateful for Rusty, for Sarah, and for the unexpected journey that had brought him peace. Winter's harshness had finally receded, replaced by quiet warmth, healing, and hope, gifts granted gently by an injured cub who had unexpectedly changed his life. In the quiet strength of James and Rusty's friendship, we find a gentle reminder that even in our darkest winters, hope and healing are always possible. Like James, we all carry wounds, losses, regrets, loneliness that sometimes feel too deep to heal. But as we've learned, courage doesn't mean standing alone. It means opening our hearts to compassion, friendship, and love. Each of us encounters hardships, challenges, and moments of fear in daily life. Let this story remind us to embrace support from those around us, to protect the innocent, and to trust that brighter days lie ahead. Today, I encourage you to share your own story of healing and friendship in the comments below. Your experiences may help someone else find courage, hope, and peace. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, amen, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who might need gentle encouragement today. May God bless each one of you, comfort your hearts, and guide you safely through every storm. Comment, amen, if you believe in hope and new beginnings.